Yerushalayim, right. It's Yerushalam or Yerushalayim, not Yerushalayim. That's a diphthong. Layim is a diphthong. That's a sophisticated vowel, like a vowel that kind of goes off on a tangent towards the end. But it was written without the yud.
Except in one place,
he says in one place. I'm not aware of that. All right. So, what did the Masoretes do? Okay, we have several things that they accomplished. First of all, preservation of the consonantal text. Okay. Obviously, there were many copyists back then, and each copyist, it's almost unavoidable that they produce some errors. These copyists are not angels, and so it's likely, and it was common for them to come up with errors. They'll perhaps misspell a word, for example. And the Masoretes wanted to defend against that, to preclude that from happening. And one of the ways they did that is by counting the words in every document and indicating where the middle is. So this way, if you were off if you left out one word or one letter, then you can kind of like a spell check. A quality control mechanism.
Sulfur. One interpretation.
Right. Right. That's a possibility. Right. That's a possibility. Sulfur also means count.
The Gemara talks about
yeah, but I don't think I'm not so convinced that the actual meaning of sulfur means to. They're called that because they counted. It could be related to a different practice. Back in Sumerian culture, the very origins of writing were related to counting things. Mm-hmm. So the very concept of writing is related to counting. So it doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think it's related to the fact that the original sulfur were counting the text, counting the words of the text. The original word sulfur simply means to write, scribe. But what the Masoretes try to do is try to create these controls. So one of them is preservation of the consonantal text. Another thing is called paragraph division. And the Rambam talks about it. Rambam talks about it in the Sefer Yad, the Mishnah Torah. Paragraph division means...
Preservation of consonantal text is not just that. It's the fact that a lot of the text doesn't have vowels, and you shouldn't have to add vowels. It's not...
Right, I'm going to discuss this in a second. So paragraph division is simply a way of dividing a text into chapters. I don't want to use the word chapter because chapter could relate to the Christian innovation of later years, of like 500 years later, to divide the... So chapter... I should use the word section maybe, or simply paragraph. So they divided, and they decided some paragraphs were more important than, some divisions were more important than others. So some were open paragraphs, and some were closed. The closed paragraph would indicate a less stronger break. It's kind of similar to the end of verse versus a asnach. Asnach and a siluk. Asnach is in the middle of a verse, and the siluk is the end of the verse. So the same thing, we have two different kind of divisions. Paragraph division, right.
May I just ask one thing here? Does the Talmud have anything to say about the Masoretic tradition?
Well,
you're starting out here with the Masoretes. Did they come out of nowhere?
Good question.
What happened to
I
the
was
Talmud?
thinking about it because the Talmud says Gofen, involved the Gofen,
the Talmud does have to say on some of those things, but not others. For example, the vowels are completely not mentioned in the Talmud. And we didn't even come to that yet.
In the strict condition, the
vocalization definitely didn't exist in the days of the Talmud. In fact, Jerome, which is a Christian, Jerome, who lived in the 4th century, he wrote the Vulgate.
He was a church father.
Right.
He was one of the church fathers.
Right, one of the church fathers, and he wrote the Vulgate. And he testifies that the Jews didn't have any vocalization, any vowel notation in their writing. So we know for sure that didn't exist.
Languages in general, it was a relatively modern innovation balance.
Right.
But they had to pronounce it.
Some things are mentioned in the Talmud. The Korean, the Ksiv are mentioned in the Talmud. Some elements of the Masoretic tradition are mentioned. The Masoretic tradition is manifold. It has a lot of different components. And some of them were simply, they took earlier traditions and they put them in writing and they standardized them. And some of them were kind of their own thing. The vocalization is one of their own systems. They came up with this system, these diacritics, to denote vowels. And up until then, they had what is called Matrice Latinus. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Does anyone know? No, it's called Matrice, M-A-T-R-E-S. It's a Latin word. Matrice Latinus. Mother is of reading. Matrice means mother. Latinus of reading. And Matrice Latinus is basically using consonants, what was originally Hebrew consonants, but converting them into vowels. Using them to indicate vowels. The 4 letters were Aleph, Hey, Vav, Yud. Originally in Hebrew, the Hebrew of 1,000 years BC used these as consonants. Okay? The word boy, for example, boy al pari, the Aleph and boy, that's part of the word. It's part of the root of the word. It's not a vowel. In ancient times, it was pronounced ba'a. The Aleph was part of the word.
With b'ni would be written ben nun, just like ben.
What did you say?
The word b'ni would be written ben nun, just
Right,
like ben.
that's correct. The word b'ni, my son, the yud in the end, which indicates possession, my son, was originally not written. And we have ancient epigraphical attestations to that. It was not written in old Assyrian and other related Coptic languages.
Israelite also.
And Israelite neither, right, that's correct. We have, for example, the Moabite stone, and we see how ancient orthographic practices, and we know that they didn't use these vocalic indicators. They only had the consonants, and each Aleph, Hey, Vav, Yud was pronounced. But
So repeat that again. Repeat that again if you don't mind, so that everybody gets it. That at some point, and you tell us which point it was, there was there was no vowel, like you're saying, Aleph, Hey, Vav, and Yud were all used as consonants.
that's correct.
So explain, give a word.
When did it start? Right.
When did it start? And describe again, if you don't mind, what exactly happened. What would a word look like? Slowly, if you don't mind.
All right. They started inserting the Aleph, Hey, Vav, Yud probably during the Second Temple period. We know Divrei HaYomim, for example, has certain sections that are almost verbatim copies from Malachim, from Kings, from the Book of Kings. And the major distinction between the two is that Malachim is written, the text, the orthographic, it's called orthography, right? Orthography. This word basically denotes the difference between writing plain A or defective A. Full, plain A means full. Right? For example, the word, let's say the participle boche, he chooses. You could write it with a vav after the base to indicate the O vowel, or you could write it without the vav. So in Malachim, this kind of word would likely occur without the vav, and in Divrei HaYomim, it would likely occur with the vav.
So later.
Yes, right.
But the question is that Divrei Malachim and everything was already copied over during that time. All these underwent changes. All the books, the early ones, the later ones, they all underwent changes.
Right. They all underwent changes, but not as thoroughly as you might expect. And the people who wrote Divrei HaYomim had a chance of writing in their own way. And the orthography in that time period was to write things plain, to write things full. And that's why they wrote the text in full. But in earlier period, they wrote defectively. And sometime during the transmission, people tended to copy text. Sometimes they inserted these matrices like these vowels. But it wasn't very thorough, and it wasn't very complete. Depended on the scribe, exactly, and it depended on the period. Maybe on a more later period, they were more likely to insert it. But at any rate, it wasn't complete. It never was standardized. And this is why, at some point, probably during the 2nd century AD, the text was already considered so sacred that they didn't want to touch it anymore. And at that point, they said, no, we're not putting any matrices like Titus anymore. We're not going to touch it.
Is that why it's half yes?
Right, exactly. This is why sometimes you have the same word plain A, sometimes you have it defectively. Right, because at some point they started working on it, but they never completed the job. So certain words have become plain A over the years, and certain words remain defectively.
Well, Pari, for example, if they would have completed it, they would have inserted the vav.
Right.
Like in modern Hebrew, they do that.
Right.
In Rabim, they have it.
Another interesting difference between the orthography of 1,000 BC, probably even older, 1200 BC, and later periods, is the use of a hey as an O vowel. For example, Osri la gefen iro, v'la sareka v'niasono. The word iro